The room was cold, colder than usual. The walls made of metal and the high ceiling above gave no warmth. The only light came from the dim glow of the artificial stars outside. Inside, the bed was hard, and there was nothing but silence. She lay there, wrapped in a thin blanket, her body trembling slightly as the cold seeped into her bones. She was used to this, the loneliness, the cold, and the silence. For years she had been nothing more than a bed warmer, an object to heat the beds of the cruel ones who had captured her. They never cared for her, never looked at her as anything more than a tool. Her name was never important to them. She was just a number, just a prisoner. But tonight something felt different. The air around her seemed to hum with a strange energy. It was subtle, almost like a whisper, but it was there. She could feel it in her heart. Something was changing. Maybe it was just her mind playing tricks on her after all. How could anything change in this place? Suddenly she heard footsteps approaching. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure why, but a sense of unease settled in her chest. Was it the guards coming to check on her again? Were they just going to ignore her like they always did, or would tonight be different? The door creaked open and she immediately tensed. But it wasn't one of the guards. It was a human, someone new. She had never seen him before, and he looked different from the others. His eyes were dark, but there was something in them, a kind of softness, a warmth that she had never seen in anyone here. He was holding something in his hand, a small device that looked like it could open the locks of her chains. She had worn these chains for so long that the metal had started to feel like a part of her. She hated them. She hated what they represented: captivity, helplessness, and a life without hope. The human stepped closer to her bed. His presence was strange, unfamiliar. For a moment she didn't know what to do. She had grown used to the cold, emotionless glances of the guards. But this man, he was different. His eyes met hers for the first time, and she felt something stir inside her. Was it fear? Was it hope? She wasn't sure, but she couldn't look away. "You don't belong here," the human said softly, almost as if he was speaking to himself. His voice was low, but it carried an undeniable strength. She couldn't understand it, but she could feel it, the truth in his words. She didn't belong here, not in this cold, dark place locked away and used like a tool. But she had been here for so long that she couldn't imagine life any other way. Could it really change? Could someone like him actually help her? Her mind raced with questions. Why was he here? Was he a new guard? But then she remembered something. The others had spoken of a new group arriving, a human force meant to manage some of the prisoners. This man had to be part of that group. But why was he looking at her like that? Why didn't he see her as just another tool to be used? The human knelt beside her bed, and for a brief moment, she felt a strange, almost comforting warmth radiate from him. He didn't touch her, but his presence was enough to make her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Safe. It didn't make sense, but it was there. "I'm going to get you out of here," the human said, his voice steady and filled with a promise. His hand reached into his pocket, pulling out a small device she had never seen before. It looked like a key, but it wasn't. He turned it in his hand, and the device beeped quietly. "What? What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, the words foreign on her lips after years of silence. The human didn't answer immediately. He just focused on the device in his hand, his fingers moving quickly over the buttons, as if he had done this before. "I'm unlocking your chains," he said, his voice filled with determination. "You don't have to stay here anymore." Her breath caught in her throat. Could this really be happening? Could this human really be the one to set her free? She had waited so long for someone to come and save her, to stop her from being just a bed warmer. Could this man really be the one to make that happen? But before she could think too much about it, she heard the sound of footsteps again. The human heard it too, his eyes snapping up to the door. There was no time, they had to hurry. The guards would be coming any moment. "You have to trust me," the human said, his voice urgent now. "Do you want to be free?" She didn't know why. But something in her told her that he was telling the truth, that he was here to help her. She nodded slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She had nothing left to lose. The human pressed a button on the device, and the chains around her wrists clicked open. She gasped, staring at the now empty cuffs. She was free. For the first time in years, she was free. But before she could move, the door to her cell slammed open, and the heavy footsteps of the guards filled the hallway. The human didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand, pulling her to her feet. "We have to run," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Now." And for the first time in years, she followed without looking back. The cold air burned in her lungs as she followed the human down the narrow corridor, her heart racing faster than it ever had before. The moment she felt the chains fall away, she felt something stir deep inside her. It was something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. But with it came fear. Fear that this was too good to be true. Fear that she had trusted too easily. Her mind was spinning with questions. Who was this human? Why did he care? The others had always seen her as nothing more than a tool, something to keep their beds warm at night. What was different about this man? The human gripped her hand tightly, his fingers firm and reassuring. He didn't let go. He was focused on getting them out of there, eyes darting nervously as he led her through the dark halls. She could see the fear in his eyes too, but there was also something else. Determination. A fire in his eyes that told her he wasn't going to let anything stop him. They reached a small metal door. The human paused, scanning the hall for signs of danger. She held her breath, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Her body was still weak, and the cold made her feel even more vulnerable. They had no weapons, no backup. It was just the two of them against the entire facility. He pressed his hand against the door's control panel, but before it opened, the door beside them slammed open with a loud bang. "Freeze!" a voice shouted. Her heart stopped. She had heard that voice before. The guard. The one who had always sneered at her, who treated her like an object to be discarded. He was running toward them, a weapon raised. She had only one thought. Run. Get out of here. Before she could react, the human pulled her towards him, his grip tightening. "No, we can't let them catch us," the human said in a low voice, but there was no time to argue. He pushed her through the door, and they dashed into a narrow hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. They heard the sound of boots pounding the metal floors behind them. The guards were getting closer. The human's breath was ragged now, and she could feel her own heart pounding in her chest, matching his. The hall turned sharply to the left. They took the corner and ducked into a small storage room. It was dark inside, and the air was musty, but it was the only place they could hide. The human pressed his back against the door, trying to slow his breathing, and she did the same. The guards passed by, their voices muffled through the thick metal. She held her breath, hoping they wouldn't hear the rapid beating of their hearts. The sound of their footsteps faded as the guards moved on. For a few moments, all they could hear was the echo of their own breathing. She wanted to say something, anything. But the words caught in her throat. What could she say? She had never been free before. She didn't know what to feel. Was it too soon to believe? The human's voice broke the silence. "Are you okay?" She nodded slowly, still too shocked to speak. She looked up at him, his face inches from hers in the dim light. His eyes were kind, but there was an edge to them. He was scared too. They both were. "Thank you," she whispered. The words felt strange coming from her mouth. She had spent so long in silence that speaking felt like a lost art. He smiled briefly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "We're not out yet. We still need to get out of here." The urgency in his voice was a reminder that they weren't safe. The facility wasn't just a building, it was a fortress, and the people inside wouldn't hesitate to capture her again. But the human wasn't afraid. He was determined to get her out no matter what. The minutes stretched on like hours, but the sound of the guards' footsteps faded into nothingness. The door creaked slightly as the human eased it open. He motioned for her to follow. "You have to keep quiet," he said softly. They slipped out of the storage room and back into the dark hallway. The human led the way, but this time he seemed more cautious. He moved quickly but silently, his eyes constantly darting from side to side as if he were anticipating danger from every corner. They passed several doors, but none of them opened. She could hear muffled voices from behind one, but the human didn't stop. He kept moving, and she followed without a word. Finally, they reached the elevator shaft. The human took a deep breath, turning to her with a focused expression. He looked at the small control panel beside the elevator and then back at her. "You ready?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. She wasn't sure if she was ready. Everything had happened so fast, and she didn't know what to expect next. But one thing was certain. She didn't want to go back. She didn't want to return to that cold, lifeless room, to the chains, to the silence. "I'm ready," she whispered. The human nodded. He pressed a button on the control panel, and the elevator doors opened with a soft ding. But before they could step inside, the sound of a heavy footstep echoed down the hall. It was the sound of a guard, and it was getting closer. Her heart raced, again. She could hear her breath quickening and her legs trembled. Would they make it? Would they escape this time? The human didn't hesitate. He stepped into the elevator, pulling her in with him. He pressed the button for the ground level and the doors closed just as the guard rounded the corner. The elevator began its descent, and she felt the air shift as they moved down, away from the danger. She glanced up at the human, her heart still pounding, and for the first time in a long while she allowed herself to believe. Maybe she wasn't just a bed warmer anymore. Maybe she was something more. The elevator hummed softly as it descended, and for a moment everything felt too quiet. The air around her was heavy, her chest tight. She could still feel the adrenaline pumping through her veins. It was hard to believe they had made it this far. The sound of their footsteps had faded, the danger of capture behind them. But not for long. The human stood beside her, tense and alert. His eyes scanned the doors, his body coiled like a spring, ready to jump into action at any second. She could see the exhaustion in his face, the way his shoulders slumped slightly, but he still carried himself with purpose. She couldn't help but admire him. He wasn't just trying to escape for himself. He was doing this for her, for a stranger, for someone who had been nothing but a prisoner for far too long. "Are we safe?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The fear in her voice was clear, but she couldn't help it. This wasn't over. It couldn't be. He glanced down at her, his gaze softening for a moment. "Not yet, but we're getting there." He looked back at the doors as the elevator continued its descent. She nodded, but her thoughts were clouded with doubt. What if this was all a mistake? What if, after all this time, freedom was something she couldn't even understand? What if the world outside was just as cold and cruel as the life she had left behind? The elevator stopped with a soft jolt and the doors slid open. She blinked, not sure if she was seeing things right. The hallway before them looked different, cleaner, more familiar. It was still dark, but there was a strange sense of peace in the air, as though this place was less a prison and more a place to breathe. The human stepped out first, checking both ways before giving her a nod to follow. She hesitated for a moment before stepping out into the hallway, the cool air brushing against her skin. It felt strange, like she was waking up from a long, heavy sleep. She wasn't used to it. They moved swiftly, keeping low to avoid any guards. The human stayed close, always watching, always making sure she was safe. He didn't let her fall behind. For the first time in years, she felt like someone cared. It was overwhelming. But the fear didn't fade. It grew. With each step they took, the feeling of being watched crept up her spine. It was like the walls had ears, the floor had eyes. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone, something, was waiting for them. "What happens if they catch us?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He didn't look at her as he answered, "We won't let that happen." The confidence in his voice surprised her. He didn't seem afraid, not even when they rounded another corner and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed in the distance. but she could feel her own body trembling. What if they were already too late? What if the guards had already found out that she was gone? The human paused. He heard it too. The footsteps. They were growing louder, closer. "Hide," he whispered, urgently. "Quick!" Without another word, he grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward a small alcove. She didn't question him. She moved swiftly, her heart pounding in her chest. They crouched down, holding their breath as the footsteps grew closer. She could see the shadows of the guards moving past them in the dim light, their voices muffled but sharp. She couldn't have gone far. Check every corner. The human clenched his fists, his jaw tight. He was angry, she could tell, but there was no time for it. They had to stay hidden. She glanced up at him, noticing the way his eyes darkened with something she couldn't name. It was more than just the anger of being chased. It was something deeper. This man had been fighting for her, and yet there was so much he wasn't saying. How long had he been planning this? Was it always his intention to free her? Or had he simply seen someone who needed help and decided to act? The footsteps passed, by them, growing faint as the guards moved further down the hallway. The human let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding and stood slowly. She followed his lead, the fear still clinging to her like a second skin. "We need to move now," he said in a low voice, his gaze scanning the hallway. "Stay close." She nodded, but her heart was racing. This wasn't just about running anymore. This was about survival. They continued down the hall, weaving between shadows, staying out of sight. The air felt thicker now, and the tension was unbearable. Every door they passed felt like a potential trap, and every corner seemed to hide a new threat. As they turned another corner, the human stopped suddenly. He held up a hand to signal her to stop. "Listen," he murmured. She strained her ears, trying to hear what he heard. At first, there was nothing. Then, just as she was about to speak, she caught the faintest sound. Footsteps. Soft, quick footsteps. Someone was coming. Someone was very close. She felt the fear rise in her chest, squeezing her heart. They were trapped. There was no way out this time. The human turned to her, his expression hard. "Stay here. Don't move until I tell you." Before she could say anything, he slipped into a nearby room, disappearing from view. Her heart pounded in her ears as she crouched behind a large crate. The footsteps were growing louder. The door to the room where the human had gone was barely cracked open, and she could see his figure standing in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment. She held her breath, hoping that this time they wouldn't be caught. The sound of approaching footsteps grew closer, and every second felt like an eternity. Then the footsteps stopped. The door creaked slightly as someone pushed it open, and everything went still. The sound of the door creaking open was like a deafening thunderclap in the silence of the hallway. The human stayed perfectly still, his breath shallow, his eyes fixed on the approaching figure. She could hear the faint echo of boots tapping against the cold floor as the guard moved closer to their hiding spot. It felt like time had slowed, each second stretching out into eternity. Her heart raced, the fear that had been growing inside her now threatening to choke her. What if the guard found them? What if they were caught now after all they had gone through? The escape had seemed so close, so real, just moments ago, but now, it felt like it was slipping away, like a dream fading in the morning light. The human's eyes locked with hers, a silent plea for her to remain quiet. She could barely breathe, but she nodded slowly, praying that the guard wouldn't notice them hiding in the shadows. The footsteps came closer, louder, and she felt the weight of every second pressing down on her chest. The guard was almost at the door to the room where they were hiding. He was just inches away from finding them. It would only take one wrong move, one slip, and everything would fall apart. But then, just as she thought it was over, the guard stopped. A strange, tense silence filled the air. The human's body was taut, ready to spring into action if needed, but still they waited. The guard seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether to continue. She dared not breathe. She could see the outline of the guard's boots under the door, his shadow stretching toward them. The seconds stretched on, a never-ending wait. Then, without warning, the guard turned and walked away, his footsteps fading as he left the hallway. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her whole body was shaking, the fear coursing through her veins. But they had survived. For now. The human didn't move immediately. He stayed crouched, his eyes never leaving the door, as if he were waiting for something. Some sign that it was truly safe to leave their hiding spot. The sound of footsteps grew fainter until they were completely gone, and only the quiet stillness remained. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the human motioned for her to follow him. She didn't hesitate. She stood and stepped carefully out of the shadows, her heart still hammering in her chest. "Come on," the human whispered, his voice low but urgent. "We need to move now, while we have a chance." She nodded, her legs unsteady but determined. They weren't out of danger yet. There was still a long way to go before they were truly free, but the human's calm, steady presence gave her hope. They moved swiftly through the dark hallway, their footsteps quiet but purposeful. The further they went, the more the sense of dread seemed to build around them. Every corner held the potential for danger. Every sound made her jump. She could feel the weight of her past pressing down on her shoulders, a constant reminder that she had been a prisoner for so long. She had forgotten what it was like to feel like a person, to have freedom, to have a choice. But with the human by her side, she was beginning to remember. Each step they took felt like a small victory. Each turn they made away from the guards felt like a promise that maybe, just maybe, she could have a life of her own. They reached another door, this one different from the others. It was sturdy, reinforced with a keypad beside it. The human approached it cautiously, his eyes scanning the hallway behind them one last time. "This is it," he said quietly. "We're almost there." She watched as he pulled a small device from his pocket. It was sleek, metallic, and unlike anything she had seen before. He worked quickly, pressing buttons and adjusting settings. The device beeped softly, and the door's lock clicked open with a satisfying sound. She stood close behind him, her breath shallow as she watched him work. The fear was still there, gnawing at her insides, but it was now mixed with something else, something stronger. She felt the smallest spark of hope. It had been so long since she'd felt this way that it almost felt like a dream. But this was real. This was happening. The human turned to her, his face serious but filled with something else. Something she couldn't quite read, but it was there in the way he looked at her. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded, her throat tight with emotions she didn't fully understand. Was she ready? For so long she had only known the cold, the chains, the life of a prisoner. But now, standing at the threshold of something new, something frightening, she felt a glimmer of freedom. It was a terrifying thing, but also exhilarating. The human gave her a small smile, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder. "It's going to be okay. We're going to make it." Before she could respond, he pushed the door open, and the world beyond it was a blur of lights and sounds. She had no idea where they were, but the outside world felt alive in a way she hadn't experienced before. It wasn't the sterile, cold world she had known for so long. It was different, more human. "Come on," the human urged, stepping through the door and into the unknown. "Let's go." For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her past lift just a little. With every step she took, she was leaving behind the life of a bedwarmer, the life of a prisoner. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it, and with him by her side, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving the dark metallic hallways of the facility behind. For a moment, everything felt surreal, like a dream that she was afraid to wake up from. The sounds of the guards and alarms were distant now, almost non-existent. The world outside was a completely different place, full of noise, light, and life. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the bright artificial lights above them. They were in a large open area, a stark contrast to the cold, claustrophobic prison she had known her entire life. The air smelled different here, cleaner, fresher, like freedom. The human didn't pause. He led her through the space, moving, swiftly but cautiously, his eyes darting around as though searching for any sign of danger. His movements were quick, precise, as though he had done this before, as though he knew exactly what he was doing. It was strange to see him so calm after everything they'd been through. She followed close behind, feeling the weight of her own uncertainty, but also the flicker of something new, hope, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience in years. She had learned to suppress it, to expect nothing, but now with each step they took away from the prison, that hope grew stronger. They passed several open doors, some leading to hallways, others to storage rooms. There was no one around, but the human kept his guard up, moving quickly and silently like a shadow. She didn't ask questions. She couldn't. She was still processing everything, the sudden rush of freedom, the risk they were taking, and the emotion swirling inside her. "Stay close," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder at her. She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. It was a strange feeling, to be moving toward something instead of away from it, to be moving with someone who cared enough to help her. The human led her through a narrow doorway into a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with strange machines and blinking lights. It looked like some kind of control center. He moved toward a console in the center of the room, quickly typing in a series of commands. She watched him, unsure of what he was doing. The tension in the air felt thick, and she could see the strain in his face. He was focused, but his hands trembled slightly as he typed. "Almost there," he muttered under his breath. She shifted nervously, her eyes scanning the room. She wanted to ask him questions, to understand what was happening, but the words stuck in her throat. She couldn't risk making a sound. The danger was still very real. Every second felt like it could be their last. Finally, the human turned to her. "This is the way out. We're going to get you somewhere safe." She looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and fear. Where? Where are we going?" He hesitated for a moment, his gaze flicking to the screen in front of him. "We're going to a place where they can't find us. A safe house. There are people there who will help us." She swallowed hard, the words sinking in. It was hard to imagine a life outside of the facility, a life without chains, without fear. But she had to believe it was possible. She had to believe that there was more to life than the cold, dark walls she had lived behind for so long. "Let's go," the human said, his voice calm but urgent. He led her out of the control room and back into the hallway. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the corridor, a reminder that they weren't truly safe yet. But she could feel something in the air, something different. Maybe it was the human's presence, his determination, or maybe it was the simple fact that she was moving forward. But for the first time in years, she felt like there was a chance, like there was something worth fighting for. They reached the exit doors, a set of heavy metal doors that looked far too secure for a simple escape. The human worked quickly, pressing several buttons on a hidden panel beside the door. It beeped once, twice, and then the doors began to slowly open, revealing a blinding light beyond. "Get ready," he warned, his eyes flicking around the room, one last time. "We need to move fast." The doors fully opened, and she could see the outside world for the first time in what felt like forever. The bright sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. There was a cool breeze, and the world seemed to breathe in a way that felt almost foreign. The world outside wasn't cold and sterile like the facility. It was alive, full of color and sound. The human took her hand, pulling her into the sunlight. She stepped forward, her legs trembling beneath her. The ground beneath her feet felt solid, real, and it made her feel as though she might collapse from the sheer weight of the moment. But they couldn't stop. The human kept moving, guiding her away from the exit doors, toward a large, sleek vehicle, parked nearby. It was unlike anything she had seen before, futuristic, streamlined, with tinted windows and a low hum. It was their way out. The human pulled open the door and motioned for her to get in. She hesitated for a moment, looking back at the facility, the place she had called home for so long. She couldn't believe she was leaving it behind, that she was actually free. But there was no time to waste. She climbed into the vehicle, her heart pounding harder than ever. The human slid into the driver's seat, starting the engine with a soft purr. The vehicle hummed to life and they pulled away from the building, leaving it behind. The landscape outside was unfamiliar, but she didn't care. The important thing was that they were free. "Where do we go now?" she asked, her voice shaky. The human glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "We go wherever you want." Her heart skipped a beat, and for the first time in years she felt a surge of possibility. The world was wide open. She was free, and this time it was real. The hum of the vehicle was the only sound as they sped down the open road, the wind rushing through the windows carrying with it the scent of freedom. She sat in the passenger seat, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the seat. The world outside seemed so vast, so different from the cold, isolated place she had just escaped. Every turn of the wheel, every passing mile felt like a step further away from her past, yet the weight of that past still clung to her like a shadow. The human kept his eyes on the road ahead, his hands steady on the wheel. He was calm, but she could sense the tension in him, the way his jaw tightened every time they passed another vehicle or turned a corner. He was alert, always scanning the surroundings, making sure they weren't being followed. She couldn't help but wonder how long they had before someone noticed they were gone, how long before the facility sent everything they had to find them. They couldn't outrun them forever. "How far are we going?" she asked, her voice breaking the silence. She had been quiet for so long, lost in her thoughts, but now the uncertainty was overwhelming. He glanced over at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Not far. We need to get to the safe house, but we have to make sure no one is following us. We're not safe yet." She nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. They weren't free yet. The chase was far from over. They had to stay ahead, keep moving, or risk being caught and dragged. "You don't have to do this for me," she said quietly, almost to herself. "You don't even know me." His grip on the wheel tightened. "I don't need to know you to know that what they did to you is wrong. No one deserves that. I can't just walk away from you." The sincerity in his voice made her heart ache. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that there was someone out there who cared. But how could she trust him? How could she trust anyone after everything she had been through? "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "For everything." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept his eyes on the road, his face set in concentration. She could see the lines of stress around his eyes, the weariness of someone who had been fighting for a cause for far too long. She didn't know how long he had been trying to help people like her, but she could tell it had taken its toll. Suddenly, the car's engine roared louder, the tires screeching as the human slammed his foot on the accelerator. She gasped, gripping the seat harder as the world outside blurred with speed. "Hold on," he shouted, his voice tense. "We've got company." She turned around quickly, her heart dropping as she saw the flashing lights in the distance. A group of vehicles was coming up fast behind them, their lights flashing in the rearview mirror, closing in with alarming speed. Her pulse quickened. The facility had already sent a search party. "Are we going to outrun them?" she asked, panic rising in her chest. He didn't answer immediately. His hands moved quickly, adjusting the speed and shifting the gears. He slammed the wheel to the left, steering the vehicle into a sharp turn. She could feel the car's tires squealing as they skidded across the road. "We're not outrunning them," he said finally, his voice calm but filled with urgency. "But we don't need to outrun them. We just need to make it to the safe house. They won't find us there." Her heart was racing now, the fear making it hard to breathe. The chase had begun in earnest, and they couldn't afford to slow down. The sound of the vehicles behind them grew louder as they followed, relentless. Keep driving, she urged, gripping the seat even tighter. Don't stop. The human nodded, his jaw clenched as he pushed the car even faster. They weaved through the traffic, taking every turn with precision, dodging cars and obstacles. It was like they were in a race against time, with everything on the line. She could hear the sirens blaring, the sound of the pursuit closing in. They were getting closer. If they didn't make it to the safe house soon, they would be trapped. Her hand trembled as she looked out the window, her mind filled with the fear of what might come next. Would they make it? Would they be caught? Would she ever have a chance at a normal life? But the human didn't stop. He kept driving, pushing forward, determined to get them to safety. The car screeched around another corner and she realized something. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She was fighting for something, fighting for a future. And for the first time, she believed it might actually be possible. The sound of the vehicles chasing them echoed in her ears, a constant reminder of how close they were to being caught. The human's grip on the wheel was tight, his knuckles white, and the car seemed to glide through the night faster and faster, as if time itself had sped up. She had never felt anything like this before. The fear of being hunted, the urgency of running, the weight of everything they had fought for hanging in the balance. The road ahead was a blur of lights and shadows, and the human didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every decision he made was calculated, every turn of the wheel precise. He knew where he was going. She didn't. She didn't know if they were going to make it, or if they were already too late. Suddenly, a loud explosion tore through the air, sending a shockwave that rattled the car's frame. The world around them seemed to shudder as a fiery ball of light burst in the distance, far enough to be seen through the rearview mirror. "They're getting desperate," the human muttered, his voice grim. She could feel her heart in her throat, as the explosion burned in her mind. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a message. They were being hunted not just by anyone, but by those who would stop at nothing to bring them back. The stakes had never been higher, another sharp turn, another stretch of open road. She barely noticed the passing scenery anymore. It was just a blur, a backdrop to their desperate flight. The human pushed the car harder, the engine roaring with power, but she could feel the weight of their pursuers gaining on them. The safe house was still miles away, and every second that ticked by felt like it could be their last. "Are we close?" she asked, barely able to form the words. He glanced at her, his face hard, but his eyes betraying the fatigue he'd been trying to hide. "We'll be there soon, just stay with me." But the pursuit was relentless. The flash of headlights behind them grew brighter, and she could see the silhouettes of the vehicles gaining ground, their shadows stretching across the road like monsters hunting in the dark. They weren't just being chased, they were being hunted. "There's no way we're outrunning them," she said, her voice trembling with a sudden realization. "What if we don't make it?" His eyes met hers for a brief moment. "We will make it. I'm not going to let them catch you." But even as he said the words, his grip on the wheel tightened, and she could feel the tension in his every movement. He was pushing the car beyond its limits, but the danger was closing in too quickly. They were running out of time. The headlights grew brighter, and she could hear the roar of the engine behind them, closer than ever. The sound of sirens blared, and a voice came over a loudspeaker from one of the pursuing vehicles. "Pull over! You are surrounded!" The human didn't slow down. Instead, he veered sharply to the right, taking them off the main road and onto a rough, narrow path that led into a dense forest. The wheels of the car kicked up dirt and rocks as they sped through the underbrush. The vehicle bounced and jerked, the rough terrain making every turn feel like a near disaster. But the cars behind them didn't hesitate. The pursuing vehicles followed, the sound of their engines only getting louder as they tore through the same forest. "This is it," the human said, his voice low but determined. "We need to lose them here, hold on." She didn't need to be told twice. Her grip on the seat tightened, her heart in her throat as the car swerved through the trees. The human maneuvered with a skill that seemed almost otherworldly, steering the car through the forest with an intensity that matched the danger they were facing. Branches scraped the sides of the car, but he didn't slow. They had to get away. The sound of the pursuing vehicles was closer now, the roar of their engines deafening. They weren't going to make it if they didn't do something drastic. And then, in the distance, she saw it. A clearing up ahead. A break in the trees. It was a chance. A slim one. But it was there. She could feel the human's eyes on it, too. They both knew that if they didn't make it through that opening, they would be cornered. Now, the human shouted, and with a final powerful jerk of the wheel, he steered the car toward the clearing. The tires screeched, the car sliding through the mud as they raced toward the opening. For a heart-stopping moment, it looked like they were going to crash into a thick tree. But the human slammed the accelerator to the floor, and they flew through the gap, the car tumbling and shaking as it sped toward the open road beyond. They were free. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The car broke through the trees and onto a paved road. The sound of the pursuing vehicles faded behind them, and the roar of their engines was replaced by the soft hum of their own. The human didn't slow down. He kept driving, eyes forward, never looking back. She couldn't believe it. They had done it. They had escaped. But as the car continued down the road, her mind raced. They were far from safe. The pursuit might have ended, but there was still so much unknown ahead. Where would they go now? Who would help them? And most importantly, what would her life be now that she was free? The human turned to her, his face finally softening as he relaxed for the first time since they started running. "We're almost there." She glanced at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "Thank you. For everything." He nodded, a small smile on his lips. "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." She felt the weight of those words, a sense of promise in them. The beginning of a new life. A life she could call her own. And as the sun began to rise on the horizon, casting a golden light over the road ahead, she realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a future now. A future filled with endless possibilities, all thanks to one human who had decided to stand up and end her captivity. They weren't just running anymore, they were moving toward something better.